I don't do velvet ropes. Never have. The whole concept always felt performative to me, like you're more interested in who's standing outside than who's actually inside. When I opened Halcyon in 2019, I made a decision early on that we wouldn't have a rope. We had a door, a very specific door, managed by a very specific person with a very specific list. And if your name wasn't on it, no amount of charm or cash or Instagram followers was going to change that. That's the thing people don't understand about fine dining. Not the Michelin star chasing kind, not the celebrity chef kind. I mean the real kind. The kind where a retired senator can sit 3 tables away from a tech founder and neither of them feels watched. The kind where a couple celebrating their 40th anniversary doesn't have to compete with someone doing an unboxing video at the next table. That's what I was selling, not the food. Though the food was exceptional. Not the wine list, though we had one of the best in the Mid-Atlantic. I was selling the feeling that, for 2 hours on a Tuesday night in Philadelphia, nothing outside these walls could touch you. That's a hard thing to protect. I learned that the hard way. My name is Elaine. I've been in the restaurant industry since I was 22, starting as a line cook in a tiny French bistro in Old City that smelled like butter and cigarettes and didn't survive the 2008 recession. I worked my way up through 3 different kitchens over 8 years, earned my stripes, burned my hands, and somewhere around 30, I realized I didn't want to cook for someone else's dream anymore. I wanted to build my own. Halcyon took everything I had, my savings, my marriage if I'm being honest, though my ex-husband would probably phrase that differently. 18 months of build-out, 3 failed inspections, 1 contractor who ghosted me with $60,000 of my money, and a soft open that went so badly wrong that I cried in the walk-in cooler for 20 minutes before pulling myself together and going back out to smile at my 12 tables. By year 2, we had a wait list. By year 3, we were on every Philadelphia's best list that mattered. By year 4, we were being mentioned in the same breath as restaurants in New York, D.C., Chicago. The kind of press that doesn't come from a publicist, the kind that comes from people who genuinely can't stop talking about a meal they had. Our clientele reflected that. We had regulars who'd been coming since month 2, a retired federal judge who always ordered the same thing and tipped like he was personally apologizing for the country's sins. A pair of architects who came every anniversary and left notes for the kitchen. We had new money and old money, and no money at all if the person could articulate why they wanted to be there. I've comped meals for school teachers who'd saved up for 6 months. I've turned away people with black cards who made my staff feel small just by how they spoke to them. The room had a standard. The room held that standard. Until it didn't. It started the way these things always start, with someone who had too much validation and not enough accountability. His name was Colton, 24 years old, roughly 2 million followers across platforms, known for what his bio described as lifestyle content, which in practice meant standing in expensive places and looking bored. He'd made a name for himself doing restaurant reviews. Not the thoughtful kind, not the kind where you could tell he actually tasted something, the kind where the camera angle mattered more than the food, where the caption did the heavy lifting, where a plate got 30 seconds of screen time and a score of 7.8 and then everyone moved on. He reached out through our general inquiry email in late October. His manager's assistant, not even his manager, the manager's assistant, sent a request for a reservation for 6, asked if we could accommodate a content opportunity, and noted that Colton's previous features had resulted in significant traffic increases for the establishments involved. I read that email twice. Then I forwarded it to my front-of-house manager, Renata, with one line, "We'll take the reservation. Standard table, no accommodations, no content." Renata wrote back, "You sure?" I wrote back, "He eats here like everyone else, or he doesn't eat here." She made the reservation. She was very clear when she confirmed it. No filming, no photography beyond personal use, no social posting without written approval from management. Standard policy. Every guest agreed to it when they booked. She got a confirmation back from the manager's assistant that said, "Noted. No problem." I should have known then. People who say no problem to something they find problematic never actually mean it. They arrived 40 minutes late. 6 of them, Colton in the middle like he was the sun, and the others were just doing their best to orbit. He was wearing what I can only describe as aggressively casual clothing, the kind that costs $400 and is designed to look like it costs nothing. He had a small camera clipped to his jacket, not a phone. A dedicated camera, the kind with a wide-angle lens. Renata spotted it immediately. She brought them to their table, got them water, and came to find me in the kitchen. She didn't make a scene. That's why I hired her. He's got a clip-on camera running, she said, calm as you like. Table 6. I wiped my hands on a side towel and took a breath. Go back, tell him the camera has to come off. Reference the agreement. Be polite. She nodded and went back out. I watched from the pass. I couldn't hear what was said, but I could read the body language. Renata spoke. Colton leaned back in his chair, tilted his head like she'd said something faintly amusing, and said something to the person next to him. Then he looked back at Renata. Then he very deliberately reached up and adjusted the camera without removing it. She came back. He said it's just for personal memories, she told me. Not posting anything. Is it on? The light's on. I left the kitchen. I want to be clear. I don't enjoy confrontation. People assume women in my position must, that there's some pleasure we take in asserting ourselves in rooms that weren't built for us. There isn't. Every time I've had to walk out of that kitchen and handle something personally, I've felt my pulse go up and my stomach tighten. I do it because the room requires it. I do it because my staff shouldn't have to absorb what the owner should handle. I walked to table 6. Colton looked up at me like I was someone he vaguely recognized but couldn't place. I'm Elaine, I said. I own Halcyon. I wanted to introduce myself and also clarify our policy. No active recording devices in the dining room. It's in the agreement you signed when you booked. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that was used to getting things done. It's not for content. I like documenting my experiences. I understand. You're welcome to use your phone for personal photos at the table. The clip camera needs to come off. It's really not a big deal. It is to us, I said, and to our other guests. He looked around the room the way people do when they're about to make a point about how nobody is paying attention. A mistake, in this case, because one table over was a woman I recognized. A city council member who came in once a month and valued her anonymity so specifically that she always sat with her back to the room. She wasn't looking at us, but she was there. Colton reached up and unclipped the camera, set it on the table. Happy? Thank you, I said, and went back to the kitchen. The meal went fine for the first hour. Renata watched the table. The camera stayed on the table. The food went out. We were running a seasonal menu that fall, a lot of root vegetables and braise, and one dessert involving a warm apple tart that people were actually coming in specifically for. The table seemed to enjoy it. One of the women in his group was taking regular photos on her phone, which was permitted. Colton mostly scrolled his phone between courses, which was rude but not my problem. Then the cheese course came out. Our cheese program is a point of pride. We work with 3 small producers in Pennsylvania and Vermont, and the presentation is deliberate, each selection plated individually, with house-made accompaniments served by whoever is working the floor that night with a brief explanation of each cheese. It's a small moment of theater. Guests who pay attention love it. Guests who don't tend to tune it out. Colton picked up the clip camera from the table while our server, a young man named Ellis, who'd been with us 2 years and genuinely knew more about cheese than most sommeliers know about wine, was mid-explanation. Ellis paused. Colton pointed the camera directly at the plate and started narrating. Quietly, but narrating. For the feed. Ellis looked at me across the room. I was already moving. I need to ask you to stop recording, I said, arriving at the table. My voice was level. I have worked very hard on keeping my voice level. Colton lowered the camera slightly, but didn't turn it off. I'm not posting it live, it's just for later. The agreement you signed, I know what I signed. He set the camera down, but the light was still on. And then, and this is the part that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it, He turned to Ellis and said, very casually, like it was a throwaway observation, "These are kind of basic for the price point, honestly. What's this place even known for?" The table went a little quiet. Ellis, bless him, answered professionally, explained the provenance of the aged Jeddah, the process behind the blue. Colton was already looking at his phone. After Ellis moved on, one of the women at the table started to make a comment. I think she was embarrassed, and Colton leaned over and said something I didn't catch. But I saw her face after he said it. She stopped talking. I went back to the kitchen. I told myself it was handled. The camera was down. We could get through the rest of the evening. What I didn't know was that the camera had never actually turned off. The little red light was visible to Renata from across the room, but Colton had positioned it on the table in a way that caught the sightline of the dining room, specifically the table where the council member was sitting. Renata came to me during the main course. "He's been recording the whole room," she said, "not just the food." I felt something settle in my chest, the kind of calm that isn't really calm. It's just what happens when you've made a decision and you know exactly what comes next. "Who's in tonight that would care?" I asked. "She's still here," Renata said, meaning the council member. "And there's a couple at table 9 celebrating something. They've mentioned it's private twice. And there's the gentleman at table 14. "Who is he?" Renata lowered her voice. "I looked him up when he booked. He's a witness in a federal case. His attorney made the reservation." I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. Then I said, "Pull the check. Don't present it yet. I need 5 minutes." I went to my office, made 1 phone call to our attorney, not to ask permission, just to document that I'd noted the situation, and then I walked back out into the dining room. I stopped first at the council member's table, leaned down, spoke quietly, told her I was aware of a situation and handling it, and that I'd personally follow up with her after the evening. She looked at me with the very specific expression of someone who has been in difficult rooms for a long time and recognizes when someone else knows what they're doing. She nodded. I went to table 9 and told the couple something similar. The woman reached out and briefly touched my arm. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Then I walked to table 6. Colton didn't see me coming. He was mid-sentence with one of his table mates, gesturing with his fork. The camera was running. I stood at the end of the table and waited. He noticed after a moment. Looked up. "Mr. Colton," I said. I used his first name as a last name the way his people did, because that's how he'd been referenced in every communication. "I'm going to need to ask you to end your meal." He blinked. "What?" "You've been recording continuously since you arrived, in violation of the agreement you signed, and your footage has captured other guests without their consent. I need you to stop recording, delete the footage from this evening, and I need your party to leave." He stared at me for a moment. The table was quiet. The tables nearby. Everyone was quiet, actually, in that way that happens in a restaurant when something real is occurring and everyone has stopped pretending not to notice. "Are you serious?" he said. "Not a question." "Completely. Do you know what kind of reach I have?" He said it like he was doing me a favor by making me aware of it. "I'm familiar with your platform," I said. "It doesn't change our policy. I could. This review would." He caught himself, regrouped, smiled that smile again. "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I wasn't posting anything inappropriate. I like this place. I wanted to feature it. We didn't agree to a feature. I'm trying to do something good for you. And here is where I made a choice that I've thought about many times since. I could have kept it professional. Stayed in the quiet, measured register I'd been using all night. But there was something about the way he said it. I'm trying to do something good for you that required a different kind of answer. I built this restaurant without your help, I said. I don't need a feature from someone who can't be bothered to read the agreement he signed, and I don't want one. I'd like you to go now." The smile left. "You'll regret this," he said, very quietly. "Maybe," I said, "but not tonight." I looked over at Renata, who was already positioned near the door. She made the smallest gesture to the 2 members of our floor staff who were near the entrance. Colton stood up slowly, the way people do when they're trying to make standing look like a statement. His table mates looked uncertain. A couple of them were already gathering their coats. One of the women, not the one he'd silenced earlier, but another, kept her eyes down the whole time, like she'd known this was coming and was embarrassed it had come at all. He walked toward the door, and then he stopped, turned around. "This place would be gone in a year," he said, loud enough that it was meant to be heard. Nobody responded. The room held. He left. Ellis came to find me after they'd gone. He looked a little shaken, which I understood. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. The cheese thing. I know." I put a hand on his shoulder briefly. "You handled it exactly right. I'm going to make sure the council members' check is comped tonight, and I need you to go to table 9 and tell them dessert is on us. Whatever they want." He nodded. "Or so," I said. "I owe you an apology. I should have pulled them out earlier. After the first camera incident, I waited too long." He looked at me, a little surprised. "It's okay. It's not, actually. But I'll do better. I mean that when I say it. I've had to say it before, and I'll have to say it again." The hardest thing about running a room like this is knowing when sentiment is costing you more than the decision to act would. I held on too long that night because I kept thinking he'd settle. He didn't settle. And in the meantime, a federal witness sat in my dining room while someone recorded him without his knowledge. I don't let myself off the hook for that. What happened next unfolded over about 2 weeks. Colton posted a video. Of course he did. It went up 2 days after the dinner. A 12-minute piece filmed in front of what I can only describe as a deliberately nondescript wall, talking about how he'd been discriminated against at a Philadelphia restaurant he didn't name, describing me as some lady who acted like she owned the place. Technically, the video got moderate traction. Some of his followers were sympathetic, some weren't. Several people in the comments were asking him what restaurant it was, and his responses were vague in a way that suggested his manager had told him not to name us directly for legal reasons. Smart. What he hadn't accounted for, and this is the part I find genuinely interesting from a professional standpoint, is that 12-minute videos leave a lot of room for details, and some of those details were identifiable. The cheese course, the specific seasonal dessert, a passing reference to a woman at a nearby table who looked like she worked in politics. That last one was the detail that mattered. I didn't do anything with any of this. I didn't have to. The council member's office made a quiet inquiry to a mutual contact. The nature of the inquiry was essentially, does this person have footage of council member so-and-so? And if so, what are the intentions? When the answer to the first question turned out to be yes, because Colton apparently hadn't deleted the footage the way I'd asked, and had in fact previewed it to someone who talked. The inquiry became less quiet. I received a call from his manager. The manager himself this time. He was apologetic in the practiced way of someone who does a lot of crisis management. "We're going to take the video down," he said. "Okay," I said, "and we'd like to resolve any concerns you have about the footage from the evening. I'd like all footage deleted in the presence of legal counsel for both parties." There was a pause. We can discuss. It's not really a discussion," I said. "Those are the terms. Your client recorded guests without their consent in a private establishment in violation of a signed agreement. Those guests have expectations of privacy that your client violated. I have an attorney. I'd suggest your client does too if he doesn't already." Another pause. "I'll have someone reach out to schedule. I'll be available." The deletion happened 11 days later in a very boring conference room in Center City with 2 attorneys and nobody making eye contact with anyone. Colton wasn't there. His manager was. He shook my hand at the end, which I found strange, and told me he admired how I'd handled things. I thanked him and went back to work. The thing I want to say about all of this, the thing I've thought about every time someone brings this story up, which happens more than you'd think because the Philadelphia restaurant world is extremely small and talks to itself constantly, is that it was never about the video. It was never about his followers, or the review or the reach, or any of the leverage he thought he was holding. It was about Ellis standing at table 6, explaining something he genuinely loves to a person who had already decided not to listen. It was about the couple at table 9 who came in to celebrate something private and found themselves in a stranger's footage. It was about the idea that the room I built, the specific, careful, deliberate room I built, means something. And what it means depends entirely on my willingness to protect it. I've had guests tell me Halcyon feels different from other restaurants. Quieter, somehow, even when it's full. Safe. I always say thank you when they say that. But what I'm thinking is, you have no idea how much work that quietness costs. It costs the ability to ignore a small red light on a table. It costs the conversation I had to have twice before it landed. It costs the willingness to walk up to a man who thinks his reach is a weapon and say, "Not in here. Halcyon is still open. We're fully booked through the end of the year." Ellis was promoted to lead floor manager in the spring, and the cheese program now has a small tasting menu built around it that we offer on Thursday evenings. The apple tart is still on the menu. The couple from table 9 came back for Valentine's Day and sent flowers to the kitchen afterward. The council member sends a bottle of wine every Christmas. She never includes a note. She doesn't need to. And Colton, I looked him up a few months ago, the way you occasionally look up someone who once said, "You'll regret this" at you in front of a dining room full of people. His follower count has drifted. His most recent videos have a few 100,000 views instead of a few million. The comments are different too, more skeptical, more pushback, less of the reflexive agreement that used to run under everything he posted. I don't know if what happened at Halcyon contributed to that. I genuinely don't. These things have 1,000 causes, and you can't usually trace them back to a single evening. But I think about something my first chef told me when I was 23 and still burning things and asking too many questions. He said, "Standards aren't what you say in the job posting. They're what you're willing to enforce at 10 o'clock on a Saturday when you're tired and it would be easier not to." I kept the standard. I kept the room. That's enough. I've thought a lot about why Colton did what he did. Not to excuse it. There's no version of this where pointing a camera at a federal witness in a private dining room becomes defensible, but because I think understanding it matters more than being angry about it. He didn't walk into Halcyon intending to cause harm. He walked in intending to take. That's a different thing, and it's worth naming clearly. He saw a beautiful room and thought, "This belongs in my content." He saw my guests and thought, "These are my backdrop." He saw Ellis standing there with genuine knowledge and genuine care, explaining something he loved and thought, "This is filler between my takes." Everything in his line of sight was material. Nothing was its own thing with its own right to exist undisturbed. That's not cruelty. It's something quieter, and I think more dangerous. It's the complete absence of the instinct to ask permission. What I've learned, not from that night specifically, but from years of building something that required protecting, is that the people who say, "I'm trying to do something good for you," while actively ignoring what you've asked them to stop doing, are telling you everything you need to know about how they see the exchange. They've already decided what's good for you. Your input is a formality. Your boundary is an obstacle. And their reach, their platform, their follower count, that's the thing they believe supersedes all of it. Colton said, "You'll regret this," when he walked out. I've heard versions of that before. It's almost always said by someone who is confused being removed from a room with being powerful in one. The regret he was counting on never came. And I've thought about that too, not with satisfaction exactly, but with something more like clarity. Because the consequence he faced wasn't something I engineered. I made one phone call to my attorney to document the situation. Everything after that moved on its own. The footage he kept when I asked him to delete it, the detail in his video that identified the council member, the fact that people who make a living broadcasting their lives tend to leave a very traceable record of the things they claim didn't happen. I didn't chase him. I didn't post about it. I went back to work. That's the thing I want Ellis to understand, and Renata, and anyone who works in a room they care about and has to make a hard call at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday when it would be easier to let it go. The protection isn't in the retaliation. The protection is in the standard. held consistently, before anyone is watching, before it becomes a story worth telling. Colton walked into a room where the standard had already been set. By the way the reservation was confirmed, by the agreement he signed, by the way Renata handled the first conversation, by the way Ellis kept explaining the cheese even when nobody was listening respectfully. The standard was already there. All I did was enforce it. What happened to Colton afterward wasn't punishment handed down by anyone. It was simply the result of his own choices meeting a room that refused to accommodate them. He recorded people who had legal and personal reasons to remain unrecorded. He kept footage he'd agreed to delete. He posted a video full of identifiable details about people who had not consented to be identified. Every one of those choices had a natural consequence, and none of those consequences required me to do anything except stand in my own doorway and say, "Not in here." Halcyon is still full. Ellis runs the floor now. The standard held. That's the whole story. There isn't a more complicated version.